Hi, my name is Rick and my company is Generator Line, and we're going to go over the step-by-step installation procedure of the wireless remote control system for the Honda EU3000IS. It's a radio frequency system that will enable automatic choke. The installation of this product does not compromise the normal operation of the generator. You will still have electric start, manual choke, and there are no cosmetic changes to the generator either. So we are now going to go over the step-by-step installation just to make the procedure simpler for you to understand. So the next procedure is going to be to remove this control panel, to pull down this control panel. But to do that, we're going to have to remove the fuel knob, which is recessed several inches into the generator. So we have to, with the number 2 long Phillips screwdriver, you need to remove that screw. Now at this point we can remove the 4 10mm bolts that are holding on the control panel. And then gently pull down the control panel, the choke cable. I'll hold it a little bit. And now we're going to remove the ignition switch. So to remove the ignition switch, the first step is to remove the ring nut on the outside of the control panel and the plastic washer. And then disconnect the 6-pin connector on the control panel, and the ignition switch will then easily remove. So to provide power to the wireless remote control system when the key switch is in the on position, we are going to solder the red wire, which is the fused wire of the wire harness of the wireless remote control system, to the outer number 6 terminal behind the ignition switch. So locate that red wire and solder this. We're going to solder this wire to there on the back of the ignition switch. And the best way to do that is to stabilize it, put it in a vise. So a helpful hint at this time is to spread the crimp band, and we are going to route the red wire underneath the crimp band and position it in place over the number 6 terminal. Then recrimp the band, which will hold that in place while we solder the connection. Okay, so now we're going to solder the red wire to the number 6 terminal. So now that we have connected the red wire to the number 6 terminal for power, we need to connect the control wires to the black with white stripe wire, the green wire, and the black wire. You need to remove those from the ignition switch harness. And to do that, take the screwdriver provided in your kit and push it into the slot above the terminal until you feel it click where you're depressing the retainer clip, and the wire will then simply remove. Needle nose pliers are a helpful tool in doing that. And then the bottom green wire. And then finally, the black wire. Okay, again, to connect the wires, each one of these wires, we're going to spread the crimp band on each one of these, each one of these 3 wires, to hold the wire in place while we solder it. So spread that crimp band. I've stripped each one of these wires about a ½ inch. Put the wire in place. recrimp. There's our white to green. We're going to do the black-white ignition wire to the brown wire. Spread that a little bit more, fit it under. And then finally, to the black wire, we're going to connect the red-white. And then we'll be ready to solder each one of these wires, and that'll be all of the control wires. That way these are all held in place while we solder the connection, which we recommended to assure that the wire stays in place and we get a good connection. Okay, so at this point we're going to drop a bead of solder onto each one of these connections just to assure that we've got a good electrical connection and to keep the wire in place. You don't need much. We're done. Another helpful hint at this point, because these retainer clips became flattened when we were removing them from the harness, we're going to take again our special tool and push back up on those tabs. So when we put these back into the harness, they'll click into place and not fall out on us. So, and according to the illustration in the installation guide, let's make sure that we put these back in the right position. So the black with red-white stripe goes into the lower left. You can actually hear that audible click going back in. And then the green with white goes into the bottom, middle. And again, helpful to use needle nose pliers. Push that into place. And then finally, the black with white stripe and brown into the top middle. And then I would suggest at this point, lightly tug on each one, make sure that they are firmly locked in, and we're ready to go on to the next step. So to confirm that we've got power going to the receiver, with the key switch already on and plugging this in, you're going to see the red light flash. I'll do that one more time. So now we know we have power going to the receiver from the battery. To confirm that all functions of the receiver are operating, you will need to connect the negative black wire of the wireless harness to the negative post of the battery. So use the provided eyelet connector and connect it to the black wire, and then bolt it onto the negative post of the battery. So at this point in the installation, it's a good idea to make sure that all our connections are good. So let's plug in the ignition switch and plug the wire harness into the receiver. And key switch is on. And we are going to check all three functions of the remote, including the choke. So we're going to connect the choke also. Pressing the big blue button will choke it temporarily and crank it. Pressing the middle blue button will hold the choke and crank it. So I'm going to hold on the middle smaller button for an additional couple moments just to check that function. And then the red button would shut it off. Okay, so at this point, let's reassemble the control panel. Get the ignition switch back in and line up the notch right on the side of the keyhole right there with the notch that is down here on the generator face. Control panel, and drop in and put on the ring nut and washer. And just to clean up these wires in the back, let's bundle the wires. And we're going to zip tie them to a couple of the control wires. The back of the generator using a couple of the provided zip ties in the kit. Connect the 6-pin connector. And leave enough slack because we're going to have to drop down the connector that is going to go into the receiver, which is going to strap right to the top of the battery right here. So we've got enough slack to do that. And we are ready to reinstall the control panel with the 4 10mm bolts. Easiest way to do that, put the bolt in there, line it up, and let's put the fuel valve back in. Best way to do that, hold the fuel valve like this, position that bolt on the top of your screwdriver and put it in like this, inserting it through right there, and then keeping pressure on it, push it back in to the point where you know it's on the fitting in there, and thread it in. And now we're ready to put the receiver to the top of the battery. So loosen the battery strap, take the receiver with the antenna on that side. Push the wire bundle out of the way. Route the antenna wire underneath the negative wire to the battery. Pull the battery strap over the receiver, pull hard, and strap it down to hold that in place. And then take the wire harness connector and then plug that, reconnect that back into the receiver. Okay, now let's go over the installation of the antenna wire. We're just going to route it right up along the side over here, and then we're going to connect it up at this point right here at this bolt. And that's what we're going to go over right now. So the first thing, we're going to remove this 10mm bolt. And then with the provided nylon plastic wire clamp, install that back into position right there. going to want to have that wire clamp positioned right there. So take your Phillips screwdriver and just hold it in position right there. Another helpful hint. And tighten down on the bolt. Route the antenna wire right up along the side of the control panel. Loop it through, essentially making an X with the antenna wire, and with one of the provided zip ties, zip tie it into place. Like so, and then again cut off the excess. Okay, so that installs the antenna wire. Okay, so now let's go over the installation of the choke, which we're going to mount up on top of the airbox. So let's open up the side maintenance door, and we're going to remove the air cleaner. First by releasing the 4 clips mounting the air cleaner cover. And we'll take that out. And the air cleaner. And there are 2 10mm nuts and 1 10mm anchor bolt holding on the back of the air cleaner. And let's get those off. The air line on top. On the bottom, and you can slide off the airbox and remove the fuel line, and we're going to mount the choke servo right to the top of this airbox right there. Okay, so now let's go over the mounting of the choke to the top of the airbox. In your kit, you're going to find a template, and I have already cut out on the outside of the black line. That template will fit in precisely on the top of your airbox. And we're going to drill right at each one of the cross marks. There's 3 of them. With a drill bit about the size, slightly larger than a shank of the panhead screw. So let's do that. So after you've drilled the 3 holes through the template, you can take the drill bit as a helpful hint, and you can enlarge and elongate the holes slightly, which will give you some adjustment for the servo. It's going to be very important that this servo mounts all the way to the rear and up against the back of the airbox. So that will give you a little bit of play and adjustment when mounting the servo. Okay, well, I was going to start it by hand. And then with the provided hex wrench, let's get a few more turns on it. We're going to leave these brackets loose for now, and I'll explain why. Be sure to mount the single hole bracket in the same way that the 2-hole bracket is mounted. And what I mean by that is you'll notice that one side is longer than the other. The longer side mounts down to the airbox. Okay, you notice the 2 brackets are mounted, and right now I've left them loose. Okay, so take the servo, and the two remaining countersink screws and start them into the two holes that are on the brackets. Thread them in several turns. And then the other one. Okay, so now the brackets are mounted onto the top of the airbox, and I've got them mounted on there loosely for a reason. And here we're going to mount this servo, and I've already got the two pan head screws mounted into the brackets. I've threaded them in slightly, not tightly, just a little bit. And you'll notice on your servo you've got a 180-degree swing on this thing. Okay, so we want to mount this like this, and then get the ribbon wire out of the way, and then what you can do is you can get this pressed down into place. And then you can swing over the second single hole bracket and mount it into place. Push those in, and at this point make sure that the servo is pressed up against the back. There's no gap between the servo and that spot right there on the airbox. Hold it in place and tighten down on the pan head screws from the inside. And don't over tighten, but now tighten down on the two countersink screws that hold the servo to the brackets. And again, don't over tighten. The servo is now mounted to the top of the airbox. Okay, so before we remount the airbox back onto the generator, let's route the servo wire through the sound wall right to the left of the battery into the engine compartment, and put it through here. See where it comes through, get a hold of it, and then let's connect the coupler. Okay, keep the servo wire out of the way, and let's remount the fuel line to the back of the airbox, and you can see the marks on the fuel line where it was before. The servo harness is up out of the way, and the servo wire is out of the way of the mounting bracket. Okay. Now we're going to mount the servo wire to the choke. Okay. Remove the manual choke cable. Note the position of the choke cable. On this choke there is a recessed area. The spring goes into the recessed area, so that is going to be mounted back this way in the end. But let's get that servo harness wire and connect that. That mounts over half only of the servo. It loops through the middle. Again, it loops only through the middle of that choke grabber right there. And then make sure that the spring goes into the recessed area. Put the manual choke cable back on. And that will allow you to still use your manual choke and also keeps so let's test all the functions of the remote control. Make sure we've got all this done properly. Okay, again, on the transmitter. The big blue button will crank it and choke it momentarily. The middle blue button will extend the choke if you just hold the button for a couple of additional moments, and the red button shuts it off. So let's test each function. Okay, key switch is on, send power to the receiver, and we'll test the first function. Momentary choke. Shut it down. Seems to work. All right, you have to wait 4 seconds because the receiver is still telling it to shut off for an additional 4 seconds. Okay, so now we're going to test the middle blue button, and we're going to hold the button for just a couple of additional seconds and hold the choke. Shut it down. Very good. We are operational. Ready to go to work. Okay, before we button this thing up, I'd like to show how to program additional transmitters. A total of 7 transmitters can be used with any one of these wireless systems. Turn the key switch on, sending power to the receiver, and next to the antenna, you're going to see a small black button. You're going to press the black button, so use a tool to access it. Press and release. And then on the large blue button only the large blue button, I'm going to press and release 3 times. And on the 3rd time I press it, the generator should start. And let's test all functions now. Okay, momentary choke and crank. Now we're going to test the extended choke function. Okay, so we have successfully programmed a second transmitter to the generator. So this generator can now run off of either one of these transmitters. And let's take the key switch off, and we're going to mount the cover.